Hi, I'm Paul Guppy. I am senior researcher with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update of what our friendly representatives are doing for us, or maybe to us, down in Olympia during the legislative session. So right now, we are in day 34 of a scheduled 105-day session, so still in the opening weeks. Committee hearings are going on in full swing in both the House and the Senate. February 21st, as I've mentioned before, is the cutoff date for passing policy bills out of committee. And then towards the end of the month, last day of the month, is the cutoff date for fiscal and budget-related bills to pass out of the committee in either house. Then those bills go to their House or Senate floor, and if they pass there, they cross over to the other house, and there are deadlines for those dates in the weeks and months ahead, so as the legislature goes through their work. So we got a comment from one of the members of our board who said, great videos, but you need to just get right to the point, okay? So I'm going to jump right into the issues very quickly. First of all is a topic that's been debated across the state. It's kind of rising in awareness, and there was a hearing on it just in the last day or so, and that is HB 1921, and that is the mileage tax bill. And word is spreading that this idea has been brought up in the legislature again. Representative Fye, who is the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, he's a Democrat from Tacoma. He proposed this bill 2 years ago. There was some debate on it then. It died an ignominious defeat in committee, and it had bipartisan apathy about this bill at the time, and it went nowhere. Now it is back. To his credit, Representative Fye says that he's proposing it for discussion, which is great. We're having a public debate on it, and his committee held a hearing on it, as I say, just a few days ago. What's interesting is that with the way the legislature operates now is you can sign up to, any citizen across the state can sign up to testify on a bill remotely. You can also sign in to just indicate pro or con. So on this bill, some 22,000 people signed up to just express their view pro or con. And even though there isn't an official count, Charles Prestrude, who's the transportation expert on our staff, scrolled through all the comments, looked at all the people who had signed up, and he conservatively figures that 90 to 95% of people signed up to say that they do not like this idea, that they said con position, the no position on HB 1921. About 123 people signed up to actually testify before the committee. The committee couldn't hear all of those. The hearing started at 4 o'clock. They did hear like 1-minute statements from people, but I think the main popular indicator is the number of people who just indicated they were against this idea. And the fact that people were motivated to express that view really has a lot of, that impresses lawmakers quite a bit, that they don't expect to hear from the public that much. So when people sign in like this, it really shows something. To me, it was remarkable as an analyst that this bill has come back. It could eventually arise again in the future. The saying among policy analysts is that the closest thing to eternal life is a bad bill in the legislature. So just because this got a very strong negative reaction for one hearing in one house does not mean that this bill is dead necessarily for this session, or that they won't quietly lay it aside and then wait for the disruption to die down and then bring the bill up again. So you should never think that a bill has been, quote, defeated until really leaders of both parties say that they're not going to pass the bill. We'll see how that goes. What the bill itself would do is start a mileage tax of 2 cents per mile that everyone drives. And they haven't gotten to the details of how to collect this tax, whether it would be an odometer tax or there would be a transponder on your car or using GPS data. All of those raise serious privacy concerns for people, that the state would track you wherever you go, or that you would report your mileage every month or every year. That mechanism is still yet to be decided. But even so, clearly people do not like this idea. What's interesting to me is that it was raised up again. And so I started to look at, like, what are some of the standard tactics that proponents use in order to push an idea that's not very popular, and they're not going to give up on it. So I'll throw out a couple of tips that I see happening with ideas like this, and use the mileage tax bill as an example. Number one, give it a friendly, kind of neutral, technical sounding name. So proponents call this the road usage charge, the RUC, and to make it sound like it's not that threatening. It's just a usage charge. It's actually a per mile tax. So a more honest labeling of the bill would call it a mileage tax. That's what people understand. When you see something given like a friendly name, then that raises suspicion right there. The other one is to sort of divide and conquer, as they call it, that there are interest groups that would definitely benefit under this bill. There is a surtax included in the bill that would go directly to transit agencies and is kind of a payoff to transit unions. So that's a 10% tax on top of the mileage tax that you would normally pay. So in other words, it's a tax on taxation. And that money would not go into the highway or road budget. As I say, it would be used for transit agencies. So that's another way to get a bill through, is provide largesse for various politically important groups like unions, and then they will get behind the bill. Another one is to provide exemptions for favored groups. So for example, government agencies wouldn't pay this tax. School districts might not pay the tax. These details have to be settled in the future, but these are the kinds of exemptions that are carved out in order to gain support for a bill. Another tactic that's used is to predict disaster if the bill doesn't pass. So we need roads and bridges. We have a big backlog. Oh my goodness, maintenance, public roads, transportation, it's essential to our economy. All of that is true, but it makes you wonder why they're not managing the resources they have now better, more efficiently, reducing costs of public projects in order to demonstrate responsibility and trust with the public first, and then ask people for more revenue. Instead, you're presented with this disaster scenario that if you don't support a new tax, then this public service is going to be shut off, and you better get on board. And then I'll get to the bottom line as to, and you're probably hinting at it here, that as to why these ideas don't gain traction, and that is fundamentally people just don't trust legislators. This money supposedly will be protected under the 18th Amendment of our state constitution, meaning it's a user charge that goes for roads and highways. The gas tax has already been eroded away, where millions of dollars are spent on other purposes outside this 18th Amendment protection. And there's no reason to think that that wouldn't happen with a mileage tax as well. So this is the chicken coming home to roost, that if the government doesn't maintain trust with the public, keep their promises, say that if funds are reserved for highways, they are really used for highways, work to cut the cost of building a highway project to show the public you're being responsible, then you might be in a position to have enough trust to propose something like a mileage tax. Currently in Olympia and across the state, none of those conditions exist. So with that deeper analysis, there's really no surprise that HB 1921 is having such a hard time, even in committee. So we'll see what happens next with that bill. That's the current status. Next, I want to kind of reinforce to encourage people to go to the state website. It's very easy with a few clicks to weigh in on a bill. And again, all you have to do is indicate whether you are in favor or against. You don't have to attend the hearing. You can leave a comment, but it is a great way to let your voice be heard in the legislature. And as I mentioned, elected officials are impressed when they hear from people, because they're like, well, you made the effort, you signed in. And then the other thing I always tell people is always be polite, be professional. It's just a turnoff for elected officials. They immediately write off your comment that you're crazy if you're using language that's overboard or extreme. So always polite, but firm. And it only takes a sentence or two, a short message, and that really makes a big difference with our elected lawmakers, and it's important for them to hear from us. Moving on, another bill I'd like to tell you about is SB 5174. This is new legislation which would apply additional restrictions on wood stoves that are used for heating in Washington state. The interesting thing about this is it's basically a regional issue. People in the eastern part of the state often use wood stoves as a supplement for their home heating. This bill would give power to state officials to restrict what kind of stoves could be used. Outdated stoves couldn't be replaced, for example. And it applies rules that are more strict than are already applied by the EPA. So current wood stoves in Washington state apply with EPA standards. This bill goes beyond that. I mentioned the comments, so I went to the website on this bill. I looked at the comments that people have been leaving. And one of those was a person said, hey, this morning outside my door, it was -4 degrees outside. And here comes the legislature trying to restrict my use of the wood stove. This person also commented that it looks like legislators in Olympia don't understand how people in the eastern part of the state live. What is the reality for them? It also marginalizes middle income and low income citizens because paying an electric heating bill or losing the supplement from a wood stove hits the bottom line for a family budget immediately. It's expensive, especially electric heat. It's very expensive. And then the last thing, and this is just my suspicion, that once again, I see this pattern of always trying to restrict people who are taking independent action. So if you have a wood stove, you're providing your own supplemental heat, maybe the main heat for your home. You're not part of a public utility. You're not buying electricity from a public agency. And I just get the sense that in Olympia, the majority tends to be hostile to anything that allows people to have independent action and control over their lives. There's this constant whittling away, even if it's something simple as wood burning heat, to just try to burden that or to make it too expensive to do that. So I think this is not necessarily about government or environmental efficiency. You get that pitch all the time. We're trying to make cleaner air. That's great. One summer wildfire produces more emissions and smoke and carbon than all the wood stoves in the state added together for a year. So I'm suspicious of arguments that it's for the environment. I think it's more about government control. And one thing I watch out for is with every bill, what is the pattern? Are they providing more freedom of discretion and more choices for the public, or are they narrowing that down? And this, even though it's simple, wood burning stove, simple technology, it makes me wonder, why are they going after people who own these stoves? And again, that bill is in committee. We'll see what happens next. One encouraging piece of news is regards the governor's proposal that he made a few weeks ago, where he wanted to expand the school lunch and breakfast program to all kids in public school automatically. Surprisingly, the Democratic chair of the Education Committee, Senator Lisa Wellman, she said that there just isn't the money for this, to pay for this. It'd be about $108 million in the budget to expand this breakfast and school lunch program more widely. So that's an interesting turnaround. Normally, you would expect that Republicans would be talking about the cost, and then they would be criticized because you don't like kids. You don't want to provide healthy meals for kids. In this case, it's a Democratic leader who is telling the governor, we don't have the money for this. We can't afford it. Maybe this is an idea they may come back to later. But again, so the role reversal is interesting, but what's also interesting to me is, again, this continued push to make people dependent on the government, even for your kids. So one not so subtle message from the school lunch and free breakfast program is, hey, parents, we don't really trust you to provide daily nutrition for your kids. It creates a dependency benefit, I guess, in schools where children don't look to their parents for essential support every day. They're looking to this government institution. And again, on the surface, it looks like it's kindly and helpful and good for kids. But the underlying message is, parents, you don't need to feed your kids. And I think that's a core loving support that parents provide for their children every day. And I think we just need to be aware that sometimes government programs send the message that parents are not central to their children's lives. And I think that's something that we should have the opposite message. We should try to encourage parents to be closer with their kids, especially in providing for their daily needs. But it's an interesting change that even the Democrats in the legislature are not going to move forward with this idea. And again, I think they're sending that message to the governor. Next is a new report from Washington Policy Center, a report card on Washington's future, we're calling it. We've just posted this on our website. And this is information about how our education system is failing, I would say, because we provide the funding numbers. We now spend $19,000 per student every year. That's a 40% increase over 10 years, adjusted for inflation, and yet the outcomes for our kids are worse than ever before, are declining. So national testing assessments show that schools are failing to educate 49% of kids in English. They are failing to educate, let me see, I have the numbers right here, 61% fail in math, and the schools are failing 57% of kids in science. So those are big numbers. More than half, in almost every case, of kids are not getting the education that they've been promised through the public schools. And this is the core message of what the schools are for. Why is that happening? There are many different reasons. One is overspending that doesn't go to the classroom. The other one is the power of the teachers union, which is more interested in increasing its own influence and money, access to money, than it is in educating kids. One indicator of that is nearly half of school district employees are not teachers. So you begin to wonder whether education is really their core mission, or is it providing good jobs for adults and the needs of kids come along second or third? That's a matter of opinion and analysis, but the point is that it's objectively true that the measurable outcome in the schools is not matching what kids need, and it's not due to a lack of resources because the schools have plenty of money. This also leads into, I think, the reason that at the federal level, the DOGE process, Department of Government Efficiency, is not running into a firestorm of resistance when they talk about cutting back the federal Department of Education. And I think the reason is because they're able to show that that department is not delivering the results that have been promised. That same reasoning applies at the state level as well. I think it indicates that there's been what shows that is that there's been a big increase in online education, homeschooling, and families shifting to private education. Other states are moving towards school choice. All of these are basically market indicators that public education is not delivering what it's promised. Our idea is maybe we need an efficiency DOGE process at the state level to get public schools to re-engage with their core mission of educating kids above all else. Do that first, and then they can look at other things in their mission, but they're not coming through with the education that we need. Next is a bill that I've been tracking before, Emergency Powers Reform. That's SB 5434. And this is an idea that Washington Policy Center has supported for years. We greatly encouraged the legislature to pass this reform when Jay Inslee was governor. He exercised emergency power during COVID for 975 days, 2.5 years. That's longer than almost any other state. We think that was completely unnecessary. He could have checked in with the legislature once in a while. He refused to do it. He refused to call a special session of the legislature to report what he was doing with emergency powers. But the main thing that disappointed us was Jay Inslee would not even discuss this issue. Bills were introduced for emergency powers before reform, and he would talk to nobody about it. He just ignored it entirely. Well, he has left office. So our new governor is much more open to reasonable reform. This bill would provide for the governor to have full emergency powers for 90 days. And after that, the legislature could extend it further, or legislative leaders can indicate in writing whether they think the emergency is continuing or not. 90 days is longer than most other states give their governors to handle an emergency. But the lesson we learned during the COVID is that there was bipartisan support in the legislature for what many of the COVID policies that were being put in place. It's not like lawmakers were opposed to it. They just wanted to represent their constituents and have a voice in the process. And again, Jay Inslee wouldn't even talk about it. So the governor's office has indicated that they support this idea. It's in committee. It had a hearing on Friday. Mark Harmsworth, our policy expert, testified before the committee in support of it. Interestingly, Mark said, it was a miracle. They didn't cut me off. So he actually had enough time to give a full statement. And it looks like this bill is going to be voted out of committee and then proceed from there. So that's an update on the top bills that we're following. We're always looking at our upcoming events. We have our live on-the-go report about the legislature. That's next Tuesday at noon. And then looking ahead, our Young Professionals program is hosting an Ask the Expert event in a week or two. And that's about, the topic of that is how to communicate effectively. So for younger people, check out our website, and that may be something that you're interested in. And with that, I'll be back with another update in the future. Thanks a lot.